Welcome to the acclaimed podcast, The Deep Dive, featuring your esteemed hosts, Andy Monitor and Drew Dinzik, powered by BetSperts.
Welcome to The Deep Dive, a more sincere kickoff of the football podcasting offseason starts right now.
A little more format today because we just kind of, it was a little scattershot last week because we were just so excited, but eventually we just kind of settled on going through each division, giving some thoughts on the big changes. And today is, as you mentioned, kind of a little more of the actual start for us. Feels real, doesn't it?
Yeah, it feels real. That's a good way to put it. And in general, 4th of July comes and goes. It feels like, okay, now it's really time to buckle up a little bit. Wimbledon off to a little bit of a struggling start because of the rain has kind of helped me stay in football mode. How was your holiday weekend otherwise? Did you have a good one?
Good. It was nice. It's been very hot, but we went to the pool. My poor wife is a nurse, had to work Monday. And it's one of those where, people don't schedule elective surgeries on the 3rd of July.
Right.
So it's basically like stuff that just had to happen. So it's like kind of one of those where it's not busy at work, but you need to be there the whole time. So those days, and you don't want to be there. So really long day for her while me and the kids were at the pool. So rough for her, but I had a great weekend. And honestly, I don't know, how big were fireworks for you when you were like a small child? Like, it was an important thing.
Yeah, massive.
So we somehow did not go to any fireworks last night on the 4th. We saw some. We went to a baseball game, and they had fireworks on the 3rd. So the kids got to see fireworks. I think that tricked them. But we went to the festival. We went to the parade. We had a lot of fun all day long, and everyone was so tired. Nobody mentioned fireworks. I'm like, I'm not driving back into town if they don't bring this up. I'm tired, so didn't even do fireworks last night. Obviously, neighbors had a bunch. I was just happy to find out my newer dog is not. I'm blessed to have 2 dogs who just don't give a shit.
That is huge.
They just kind of look around that, because I've had some dogs that hate it, whatever. But grilled some ribs, grilled some corn ribs. All the food was good. The weather was nice, and now we're just sucks being back at it, man. I feel like garbage today. I had too much to drink. I mean, just high noons and meat and bourbon and all the heat. It really kicks your ass.
Yeah, festivities kicked off around my house on Thursday. So Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday is 6 hard days on the old liver. And it was fun. It was a great time. We went out to Catalina for the day yesterday, did a huge hike all around the east end of the island, which was a ton of fun in the morning, and then sat around at the beach and took a paddleboard around. The boats in the harbor there were just everybody was super festive. There was boat parades, human parades. We saw the USC marching band. It was a cool day.
It's and like you said, it gets to be a long weekend, man. I did. The best part was too, we went to the baseball game I went to was a Northwoods League game. Mm-hmm. For anybody here who's from Minnesota, Wisconsin, Thunder Bay has a team. It's kind of this Midwest area, and our team just got the ever-living shit kicked out of them. As I don't think I've ever been to at least a less competitive baseball game. It was like I went and got a soda, and they scored 5 more runs. They batted around 2 innings in a row. It was 12-1 like that. Just every pitcher we threw out there they just threw strikes. I mean, I'm not even a baseball guy, but it's mix in a breaking ball, buddy. They were just teeing off on you. It was an absolute shellacking. So my hat tip to the Eau Claire Express for the absolute ass whooping, but I think they stuck around for the fireworks too. So God bless them. They seemed like nice kids. It's for anyone who's a little bit of a purist, it is Woodbat League.
All right.
So, I mean, I've just watched a bunch of, college softball and college baseball and stuff. It's nice to hear the actual crack of the wood bat.
That's
when
cool.
you're watching some lesser stuff.
All
But
right.
yeah, now we're going to hear the smack of the shoulder pads and the helmets pretty
Yes.
soon. Hall
We're
of
not
Fame
that
game is
we're not that far away
off.
from a bunch of teams report later this month. I think we're gonna start the news and info is gonna start cranking up big time. Rookies report July 18th for a number of teams. Vets report July 22nd, 21st, 25th. So yeah, we're a couple weeks away from really cranking through some serious news and information as we go through the preseason.
It's funny too, though. I spent quite a bit. I spent quite a bit of time on Twitter today. I'm not sure I ran into any NFL news like whatsoever. It was really quiet.
It was
just people bitching about tennis like us. And I should, and we'll do that right off the top too. I should mention today's sponsor is again Sporttrade.
Ooh.
Who is if you're a New Jersey guy, if you're a Colorado gal, or vice versa, or any combination with wear out, you can test out their app and start doing some trading like I was doing. Not just test out, like you can live trade, buddy. You can get your money in there and start getting screwed like me. I screwed up big time on the Rory thing. I set like a sell limit, and I didn't quite get there. It sold like part of it. And then obviously he didn't win the tournament 2 weeks ago or whenever it was. So I was kind of grumpy about losing on that because basically I could sell for about 2.5x. I set it about 2.75. It just never quite got there. And then, shit just goes right down.
Pear-shaped real quick. Yeah.
Yeah. We have, if we have some Wimbledon later this week while I'm watching golf, I'm going to have tennis on the other monitor too.
Yeah.
Do some live trading. So check it out. The links will be in the show notes here if you need a link to get there. I think there's a $100 deposit match if you sign up in either of those states.
Yeah. There's been some fun matches so far from a live trading standpoint. Otherwise, I mean, it's been pretty chalky. Not getting much out of this tournament from entertainment value yet. But we've had a couple matches like the Fritz one where there was some obvious
Ben Shelton.
Ben Shelton was a big one, big swings. It's a good thing I wasn't live firing into Sporttrade tennis trading today, because I would have had a sincerely strong belief that Sebastian Korda was going to come back and beat the rat Jiri Vesely after losing that first set. But he did not.
I can't watch Jiri Vesely and not think of the Burbs. He looks like the one neighbor kid.
He is such a rat human. It's weird. But it's
sorry, Vesely.
I'm sure he's over it at this point. No, I don't think so. But whatever the case was, that would have been a big fat L for me, because I would have been scooping what I thought was bargain basement prices on Sebastian Korda just to see him bow out aggressively fast in this tournament.
Yeah. And then final kind of Wimbledon thought, some protesters, and I'm a bit of an expert. The last few games I've been to in general, like I've had protesters at a bunch. I was at the Timberwolves game where we've all seen that, that security guard pop out of the first row like that fast. I was there for that. I've been at every baseball game. It seems like I go to, somebody runs on the field. Wimbledon, this was maybe the most annoying one ever. They threw like a whole 1,000-piece puzzle on the grass. Like a couple of them, I think. Like it looked like confetti or popcorn. It was puzzles, like jigsaw puzzles, right?
Yeah.
Like somebody had to pick all that shit up. I would be so mad.
1,000 pieces.
Why couldn't you just streak or something?
Yeah. No, the best was it was a Roger Federer puzzle and a Dusan Lajovic puzzle.
Dusan Lajovic, yeah.
Dusan's tweet of "This is my career highlight at Wimbledon" was pretty excellent. I don't know where you get a Dusan Lajovic puzzle, but that's fine. Let's talk some football, okay?
Yes, let's get into the
preseason is on the horizon, but it's the regular season that we're really gonna give its due deep dive discourse to today, and this is the annual kind of breaking down the sequencing that the NFL gives us, less so from a who's going to get off to a hot start, who's going to get off to a cool start type of navel gazing, and more along the lines of, who got dealt a fair hand who got dealt, as a pretty brutal hand when it comes to things like rest, things like travel. And it's always interesting to see how the NFL deals with this stuff, because as people know and decry every time the schedule comes out, there's huge disparity across the league in terms of net rest days compared to your opponent. And then just how much travel you ultimately are doing. Some of that's just geography. Like there's more teams on the East Coast than this middle of the country. And if you're in the middle of the country, you're just by nature going to fly less. But then you have trips internationally, and you have some clusters of travel, which have shown to be somewhat predictive in terms of underperforming. And we've quantified it all for you guys, and we want to talk about that. But before we get into this year, Andy, because I went.
Go ahead with yours, and then I have a thought too. I want to ask you a question on.
Before we get into this year's, I want to kind of go back and look at 2022 in a little bit more granularity and see if we can kind of hypothesize about a couple things. Because every year we do this podcast, I do this exact same qualifier at the very top, which is a lot of this is solved. A lot of this is known. A lot of this is baked into the market numbers. And it's not necessarily an answer key in terms of winning and losing. It's just important to kind of see it all and think about how you're going to deal with this stuff. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I think most of it is, and we know that. I think that'd be the first thing that, God forsake, somebody who's a bit misanthropic got a hold of this. They'd say, well, this is dumb. All this, the market knows this. You don't think the market knows they have a Monday night game? Like, yes, but, and we mentioned this probably a month ago, and it's good to know why. It's good to know, like when you have your, I think it was the power ratings episode, we said like, hey, you have your power ratings and they're off. Like you should know, hey, this team has a weird rest advantage. This team has some stuff that is going to get baked into the market and kind of slightly adjust off your numbers. And it's helpful to know why. And I guess my question for you is, because you said, let's go back and look at 2022. I'd like to think back a little further before we do that. Maybe even just like 10 years. Okay. I still consider that pretty much the same era of football. That's, obviously passing games are becoming much more important. We have the current 2-point conversion rules, obviously, for the last 30 years now, but not too much has changed. The extra point is probably the biggest one that's changed recently, outside of just, some of the changes in penalty rules that have really helped the offense out. But, just in general, what's your takeaway on things that are included in this chart that have become more or less baked in because of, the market realizing it, or teams changing how they do things? Because, I think a really big one that, probably 10 to 15 years ago was probably more actionable was these teams that, they just didn't do the thing where, hey, let's stay in West Virginia because we have 2 straight trips across the country. Like teams were dumb about that. Teams in general were worse about international games. I should qualify that with some teams are still kind of bad at planning for these international trips. We still have that at some points. But I think travel in general, I feel like teams and let's call them organizations. It's a business. These businesses have become better. And when we talk analytics, everyone wants to talk fourth downs and, kicking field goals and that sort of stuff. But a big part of analytics too is just maximizing everything you can about the entire week, whether it's the practice schedule or the dietitians that they have nowadays and hydration experts. But a lot of these people have looked into this as far as how can we maximize our travel and not make it more of minimizing the effects of travel, I guess. I think teams have gotten a lot better about that. And I don't know, that's my biggest reason for a little bit of the drop in home field, I guess.
Yeah, I would agree with that. When I really was focused clearly on trying to understand this problem or solve this problem 5 years ago, maybe, it was pretty clear to me that the back-to-back roadies situationally were underpriced. Early in the season, they were not correctly priced. Late in the season, they were over-corrected, right? Does that make sense? And that kind of told me that the underlying factor was, these 2 trips in a row when your body's not acclimatized to the grind of an NFL season, negative impacts you relative to your opponent. But once you got past like week 8, it was much more just injuries and, you know, the wear and tear of the season, and the, you know, the body, you know, just by nature, you know, just naturally kind of gets more used to, okay, it's, you know, travel day, you know, this is what I do on the road. Then we play and then we go home. Like you get into the routine. It's less of an obvious factor. Now, I think, like you said, most NFL teams take it very seriously in terms of preparation and planning, and, you know, how do we avoid, you know, creating, you know, losing the game before we even step on the field. And that has made it to where it's flat all season long. It's a much narrower effect even in the data. And it's really only in the handful of like, wow, that's a really bad situation, and the team is not staying on the East Coast. They are making 2 trips for some dumb reason. Or like the Rams a couple years ago, I don't know if you remember this, but they had 4 of their first 6 weeks, or 4 weeks out of 6 kind of early in the season, that were all East Coast games, and they weren't staying east any of those trips. So they were logging wild.
It was like 4 out of the first 5 weeks or something horrible.
Something crazy. And
there's all, and that's a fun part, and we'll see what we have this year. There's going to be something, obviously, but there's also some weird idiosyncrasy like that, where it's like, was it the Falcons or the Lions? Like, I think it was the Falcons. One of those teams is like, they're going to play indoors for 9 straight weeks. Or, you know, there's, it's like, this team doesn't leave the Eastern time zone until week 17. It's like, how do these things happen? But obviously putting together a schedule is very difficult.
Yeah, it was 2020 for the Rams, and they were at the Eagles, at the Bills, weeks 2 and 3. They underperformed in the second of those. They were at Washington, at San Francisco. Obviously, one of those is a West Coast destination, but it just underlies the point that they're flying back and forth and back and forth. Their 4th trip east came week 8 at the Dolphins, and that was their worst performance of the season. I blame it on the travel and the bye being on the, you know, on the horizon for them, and desperately needing a break. But there's, you know, kind of select examples of that. Let's talk about the kind of the effect of rest and the way that the market prices the buy first, though, and then we'll, unless you want to stay right on travel and dive into those numbers, because
no.
Okay.
I just think teams have gotten better. I think we need to realize, like, it is a factor. It will be a factor in those extreme situations, but in general, we can't just be like, oh man, it's a road game. Like that can't be, you know, that can't be the end all be all. Like, teams have gotten a lot better with their travel organizations. You just do have to monitor that stuff. And that's the beauty of the Deep Dive Discord, guys. Boy, anytime we've had one of those, like in the last year, where it's like, we're not 100% sure where they're staying or what their plans were, or we're not sure when this team's leaving for London. Somebody's on that, like, stink on shit. So thank you to everyone who helps dig out that news right away. I mean, that's the biggest thing, I think, for a lot of those games. And as the international series obviously is not going anywhere. Yeah. I think there's still going to be some angles there with some teams who generally screw up how that works.
Yeah. And I mean, as you look at this schedule this year, there's pretty obviously some spots where I would assume that that team is going to stay East or West. We don't know. And yeah, the international travel stuff, I completely agree with there. You know, some teams take that seriously and they go, you know, acclimatize for a week, and others don't, and that makes a huge difference.
Sam brings up a point. This was something I had kind of pinned in my notes for later, but it's worth bringing up because it kind of fits the topic. What about teams that have super late or super early buys and have to play 10 plus straight games? Just off the top of my head, I'd much rather have the super late buy. If obviously I want the buy in the middle, I want the buy in a perfect spot, like right after a couple road games, and gives me the perfect spot for, you know, resting my team and getting organized for the second half of the season. But if you gave me like the, you know, choice between week 5 and week 13, I think I'd take 13 every time. It seems like the grind of just knowing, oh shit, we already, you know, it's you used your mulligan on the first hole and you got to play the rest of that scramble, you know, knowing it's gone. Like, just having that out of the way so early and realizing, like, hey, we're going to make the playoffs and we could play like, you know, 14 straight weeks here. It's a lot of football. There's some short weeks in there. There's some like we mentioned, travel spots. Like, that gets to be a grind. I think the early buy is rough.
Yeah, the problem is there's so few. It's such a small sample problem that you can't really tease out what bye week is the best. Or if you do, you're not necessarily getting the right, like you're doing a little bit of leaping there. What I can tell you about the bye is over the last 10 years, the true bye. So this is 6, 7, or 8 days rest advantage over your opponent. That has been over accounted for in the market to the tune of a point, roughly. Okay. Teams with the bye win about 55% of the time. Okay. That's obviously a 5% bump over an average, right? But it's not worth the what's the average line? The average line is like almost 2 or 2.5, I think, for the team that's got the rest advantage, and it really should be something more like 1 or maybe a little under 1. And so it's over, it's over reflected in the market numbers, and that's not shocking. In my experience, it is usually built in almost perfectly to the openers, which is probably why it's a little bit maybe over reflected. There may be some market movement during the week where people are kind of, pushing it in the direction of the rested team for whatever reason.
Yeah, and I need a team to bet on. Like, this team's coming off a bye.
Could be.
They're only big. And I think people see numbers that, if there is going to be movement and they see it's pushing a key number or something, they're more apt to grab it. I think there's a bit of as people start to get smarter about this, because I find this happening to me too, where my eyes are just drawn to -2.5.
Yeah.
Especially if it's -2.5, -115, -120, my eyes are drawn to that. Like, it might not even be something that's on my radar, but like, man, do I have to get that before it moves?
Yeah.
And some of those, it's like, hey, this opener was probably perfect. But if it opens in a spot like that, it feels like there's some action that took it up to 3 because they're off a bye, or they had some weird rest advantage, or they're playing, the third straight game on the road, the opponent, where there's something coming in where you have a nice narrative to, I don't know, sell yourself to bet on the other side. But no, I mean, I think the more obvious the spot, the more likely to have exactly what you said, where it's overvalued in the market and as far as the close goes.
Mm-hmm. So last year, in particular, 6, 7, 8 days rest advantage was you would have lost against the spread, small loss, like 11 and 12 in the regular season, against the spread. 15 and 10. I'm sorry, 13 and 10, straight up there. Another about a point and change overshoot in the very small sample we've got here. So basically, my general read is, it's important to know when the bye is. It's important to kind of glean what's going on with the team going into and out of their bye. I still contend that sometimes teams that go into their bye losing tend to come out of their bye performing a little bit better. Teams that go into their bye and then are playing at home a lot of times have a travel advantage over their opponent. Teams that go into their bye and then are playing on the road, sometimes the travel disadvantage, I think, is, largely negates whatever rest advantage they have, because the standout in the last several years as far as off the bye really wildly underperforming relative to market is the road teams off of a bye, for whatever that's worth. So I don't know if there's I don't know if this is noise just because we're talking about such a small sample size now, but for whatever reason, the sample in the last 5 years I've got of teams coming off of a bye and then, but having a travel disadvantage. So basically they're on the road, their opponent has been home or whatever.
Yeah.
Those are off market by 2.5 points. Which is kind of a lot, kind of surprising, honestly. And so, keep it in the back of your mind, I guess. If you see a team that's getting market support, that's on the road, off a bye, there's potentially just a little bit of a overreaction cooked in there, or maybe something small
Just
that the market's
some
not accounting for.
some automatic EV. Just in
Yeah.
general, I suppose you'd have to like blanket bet all of them. But I mean, if it's another one of those things where I think the main overarching theme of this entire podcast and this entire schedule is there's nothing on here that should make you place a bet.
Right.
It should just be there should be stuff that reinforces a bet or pushes you off a bet or just adds a little extra context. And, as we start talking about buys, we can start looking at how teams will, maybe plan their seasons. We don't have a ton of it this year. A lot of the rookie quarterbacks are just starting right out of the gates. But, I mean, there's a few probably candidates for benching where, hey, maybe we're done with Sam Howell at a certain point. Maybe we're done with, it depends how bad some of these teams play that have some younger quarterbacks sitting in the wings, or maybe decide to rest some guys, or have a quarterback who has a bum elbow, who hasn't had surgery on it for 3 years. Maybe there's a time to sit him out a little too and get him healthy. The buy can be interesting from a bit of a macro theme too, when you're looking at when it occurs for some of these teams in their unique situations.
Yeah. As far as the travel disadvantage stuff goes, the only real signal that popped from quantifying it last year for me was the 5% tails, like the real extreme stuff, the upper 5% of margin. Pretty clearly there was an underprice in the market to the tune of about 1.5 points. It's only 5% a game, so it's not enough to really have a strong conclusion on. But the fact that it glides and that there's more signal with, kind of the bigger the margin in kind of the systematic way we took this. And just again, the way that I'm doing the travel advantage disadvantage calc, I'm taking the miles traveled in the last 3 weeks relative to the median of any team in a 3 week period over the balance of the season. So it's basically saying how much worse or better off are you than a median team over a 3 game sample. I'm weighting the current game the most, the previous week the second most, and the 3 weeks ago the least. And
what is the median amounts of miles traveled? Over a 3 week period, what is the median miles traveled?
So what's funny is it's up this year.
I mean,
it's just the way that the schedule works and who's playing who.
The way you cross schedules, because if you cross with, if your East cross with East or your West cross with West, it's just going to naturally bring that down. But when there's a lot of cross country travel, I suppose it's naturally going to be a lot higher.
Yeah. I'll tell you what the median is this year. It's the median.
And then, more international games does not help that either. Germany is further than London, and Germany's a lot further than, Chicago for anybody.
The median miles traveled in a 3 week sample for NFL teams this year is 3,500 miles. It was about 2,800 miles last year. I'm sorry, kilometers. I'm in kilometers because that's my equation is set up for kilometers for distance. So 3,500 kilometers.
It's still a bunch.
Yeah, it's a lot.
I would not have guessed that high.
Yeah. So in a given week, they're basically flying across the country. For sure, I would say that
when you did that, did you assume teams would be staying over?
I have nothing built in for teams staying over. And in fact, when we did this last year, the top 4 or 5 travel disadvantage spots, the teams made the choice to stay. It was like Atlanta, the week that they went, weeks 2 and 3, they went like at San Francisco and then at Seattle. They stayed in Seattle. That was one of them. There were a couple other ones where, the flashing red travel warning also actually just meant, oh no, we're planning on this. And there's a couple of those this year too, and we'll get into those and point them out as we kind of talk through it. But a team like the Giants going at Arizona, at San Francisco, weeks 2, weeks 3. they might elect to stay west. Wouldn't shock me. So again, there's not a ton of signal in the travel disadvantage, but if you're out there at the tails, then it does seem like it sincerely negatively impacts your performance by a decent amount. The combination of travel disadvantage and rest disadvantage is sort of the sweet spot. Like if you're out on both of those, you're missing your median expectation by a decent amount over the last 5 years. So if you're tired and you're, if you're at a rest disadvantage and a travel disadvantage, that's kind of the widowmaker spot, at least in the handful of years we've looked at this. I will say also that in the rest, we mentioned like 6, 7, 8 days rest, and that being solved and or over accounted for by market. 3 and 4 days rest still not accounted for correctly. So that kind of extra rest you get from Thursday night football in preparation for your opponent the next week, there's still signal there for sure. In fact, that's almost more valuable than a week rest advantage, which I think has something to do with the way that the bye and the rules are, right? I've always kind of theorized this.
So, and the thing about the bye is it's not as if you gain, a week of practice time.
Yeah, your coach gets to kind of tweak scheme, but the players are just get a vacation, right?
Yeah, you're off. You're just done for the full week. Whereas, I know they're not. There's probably some concessions made on, hey, we're not going to go 2-a-days on Friday, the day after a Thursday game. Obviously, this is a rest and recoup and get in and see the trainer kind of day. But the team doesn't go off on their ways and end up. God, was the New York Giants boat trip a bye week thing?
No,
that was off season, right?
I don't remember what the New York Giants boat trip was.
Somebody remind me when the boat thing happened. But I mean, guys are staying, and helping and working with the team, working with the coaches, helping get prepped for the next game. I think that's where that makes a difference. And we've seen this a couple times now, and I don't know how often this used to happen. It feels like it happens more. It'd be worth checking into. But the whatever we used to call it, something stupid, the mini bonus bye, where the team is coming off a Thursday night game into like a Monday night game, or they were coming off a Thursday night game. So they had that extra 3 or 4 days, and the other team had like 1 fewer days because they were coming off a Monday. So they had that bonus extra day where it was like, hey, we have 9 or 10 days, and you have 6. And there were some bad results for the teams in those spots, like you said, especially compared to teams coming off the bye.
Yeah, I know. I completely agree. And so there's about a point left in that relative, the way the market treats those games and what that's worth. It was the Packers game.
Yeah,
the winning percentage for 3 or 4 days rest was 58%. So higher than just the bye, 55. Go figure. And I think it must have something to do with you're getting extra practice time for your guys.
Then a little added wrinkle, the flex, the Thursday night flex. Patrick brings up the flexing. I don't think it's going to be a big factor because they are limited. They have a monkey paw in this. They can only do it so many times.
It is a factor, and I was going to save this for the end, but it's a bad one. It's a bad factor.
It's going to happen. They're going to use this, but they can't do it very often. And the fact you're going to know about it, let's say they have to let these teams know like a month in advance when they do this. It sounds like.
Yeah. We'll know. We'll know about it. The prep and all that will be fine. But the bigger factor on the Thursday night thing, none of the rookie head coaches have Thursday night games this year.
Yeah. And something else that Casey brings up is Casey with the gnarly end of schedule rest disadvantage.
It is.
Saw that.
Yeah.
And I wondered too, I'm like, God, that's going to be funny if we talk about this at length and they're resting players because it doesn't matter.
Yeah. I thought I made a bust because I was like, how can they have a rest disadvantage over and over and over and over again? It must have been intentional on the part of the schedule makers to try to enforce a little parity. I honestly think so, because there's no reason that you would have rest disadvantage over and over and over and over again at the end of your season like that. And clusters of rest disadvantage are more impactful than single standalone for sure. So I think travel, kind of thinking about sort of the added factors, how travel and rest combined, cumulative stuff, all of that definitely stands out to me as sort of small factors you can probably still glean a decent little bit of an edge from. The ancillary stuff that I just kind of put on there as sort of a, hey, this is good old narrative street here. If you want to talk about a warm team going to a cold, going, or a dome team going outside, blah, blah, there's still signal in that stuff. I was actually like genuinely surprised by this. But the time zone stuff last year, if you had a time zone advantage over your opponent, and I looked at two different examples. One is a West Coast time kicking off early, so before your body clock normally would be ready. And I looked at the example of an East Coast team kicking off late against a West Coast team, so that they're kind of at the tail end of their optimal window and you're a little bit outside of yours. And in 31 examples, it was 19 and 12 against the spread for the team with the time advantage, and to the tune of about a point on average, which kind of surprised me that's now like the fourth year in a row that's happened. So pretty clearly there's something going on still with body clock adjusting for time and stuff like that. The dome and warm weather teams playing in cold weather. We
saw it this weekend with Joey Chestnut.
Yeah, sure.
Athletes are.
He was ready to go.
I
know, but he was ready to go at a certain time, and the minute it was
athletes are creatures of habit, and start throwing things off like that. Yeah, the early times for the West Coast teams.
Yeah,
and then we did have start. We didn't do it for a couple years. It felt like, but what time do those London games start? When they were doing the. It's like 6:30 West Coast time. Yeah.
Seattle kicked off at 6 o'clock West Coast time in Munich last year, and they looked like it for a good first half of that. For a full first half of that game, they looked like they woke up at 6 a.m. and tried to play football. The cold, warm weather teams in at least 20 plus difference of where they normally play and where they are playing. Were 15 and 10 against the spread. That was a point. Surprised that was worth a point, but sure enough, there's still something there. And then hot, there's very few, but in basically the month of September, teams that spring training in cold weather and then go play in Florida, they stink. They still stink, but it's a teeny sample. It was like 1 and 3 against the spread for the hot teams. So there's still something there for all of these ancillary factors, which surprises me, but we'll see if that happens again next year. Either way, we went to the trouble of combining it all into one, I guess two snazzy graphics, one per conference. You ready to look at 2023, Andy?
I am.
Do you have any more thoughts or questions or comments on like what this stuff is worth relative to market?
No, I think.
You think it's mostly noise?
I don't want to say your math sucks and you're off, but because I think you're right, but there has to be some confidence intervals with this sort of stuff because of the samples just are so small. But I believe that like what we said, like you're definitely directionally correct. Because of it's enough that it's not noise, but it's still hard to say like this is worth a point. I think that maybe that's the takeaway. I'm just trying to convey to anyone listening, when you say, when Drew says I did the math and I looked back and this is worth about a point over the last however many years you said, don't just take that and start applying that. Just know that there's still a little bit of a market edge against teams in that spot, and that's roughly the amount that you're seeing as far as a percentage.
Yeah, and what I'm talking about is the average residual between the market close and the result. So, market closed 6. Market closed 1.5. Actual result was a 6-point loss. That's a 4.5 point residual. So that's what I'm looking at in terms of qualifying this. And I will also say that with a lot of the kind of time and weather related stuff, there's combining factors there, right? Like if you take the time, the time disadvantage as an example, it just so happens that a bunch of those are also like really bad travel spots, right? Like they kind of have it. Yeah. If the Chargers are playing at, 9:00 in the morning, their time, that means they're on the other side of the country, right? Like there's some of that there too, which I think, maybe obscuring some of this.
Well, and the toughest part with doing any of this, and that's why, the bigger the sample, the better, obviously, with everything. But the toughest thing about any of this, when you're dealing with some of these things being 30, 40 game samples, is, hey, this is example A. Like we had the rest advantage or rest disadvantage for this team. And, this is the result we got. So we had threw that into the data, but start digging in and the Tua got knocked out in the first quarter.
Mm-hmm.
Should we still be using that data? Obviously there's games that are going to be over a big enough sample. There'll be games that counteract that. Like, there's also a game where the quarterback got knocked out for the other team, the team with the advantage. So it's tough because there's so much context that has to be taken into some of this stuff. But I think in general, I love what you put together there. And, it's interesting to find out that some of this stuff it goes both ways. Like that's the most interesting thing, I think, from what you've just espoused is like, hey, people are overvaluing this against the market close at the buy, and we're still undervaluing some of these spots as well in the market. So it's crazy that in one of the bigger markets in the world, there's still some goofiness according to some of these situational spots.
I guess I didn't really realize how correlated some of this stuff was, but of the time disadvantage spots, 25 of those, 32 also you're at a travel disadvantage. Of the two cold spots, which there are 37 of those examples, dome teams or warm weather teams, outdoor and cold weather, every single one of them except for one is a travel disadvantage, which is kind of crazy. So it's there that is kind of, I think, a pretty interesting way to not kind of narrow down the sample size of trying to figure out, two things are happening here. The confluence of those may be a little bit underpriced. Yeah. Because
you're not even factoring in de-icing the plane.
Yeah, that's.
Do you even know what that means? For California?
So the misfit on two cold games, by the way, was 37. Of those, the average misfit was 2.7 points. So that was a non-trivial one, which I was kind of surprised by. Anyway, we move on to 2023.
AFC or NFC? What do you want?
Let's look at the AFC first. This is the Conference of Champions, at least for now in the foreseeable future. And a couple things stand out pretty obviously, and it was already brought up on this podcast, and I will add some commentary to that. But KC from week 12 to week 17 is a rest disadvantage every single week. That's kind of rare to see 6 in a row. Now, the first and last of those is, I think, like a 1 or 2 game disadvantage, and that in the database is total noise, right? Like there is 0. The residual is 0 for 1 and 2 rests. But
it gets a bump because it's part of a cluster.
There you go. Yeah, exactly. Like
but you have that small rest disadvantage isolated, maybe not an issue, but you throw a couple of those in a cluster. Also where you have to go to Lambeau and then play Buffalo back to back, and God knows what, maybe New England's halfway decent. It could be a tough stretch between the two, what are supposed to be easier games against Vegas and then Cincinnati and the Chargers. And they really did kind of set up to like, hey, guess what? We're not playing the AFC title game in Kansas City this year.
They're trying.
This team's getting the 3 seed tops.
All right. But like the cumulative rest disadvantage for the Chiefs is high. it comes against some meaningful teams. Certainly Green Bay, Buffalo, New England, and Cincinnati, I would say, are meaningful teams on their schedule to have a disadvantage against is not great. Buffalo especially, and that one again, that's one where you have a travel advantage over them, right? So that kind of falls into that bucket of maybe overpricing the advantage when we get there. But that's it. This is not a great stretch for them, and they have the largest cumulative rest disadvantage in the AFC by a lot. 13 total games lost. 13 total days lost relative to opponent. The next highest in the AFC is the Chargers with 6. After that, Vegas has 4. Almost everyone else in the AFC is a net rest winner, which is kind of interesting. Can't explain that, how that actually happened to work out. But most of the rest lost is in the NFC this year for some reason. I will note that a couple of teams with high hopes that have huge advantages over the balance of the season. The Jets have 12 days of net advantage, Cleveland with 10, Tennessee 11, Baltimore 9, Miami 7, Pitt 7.
Ooh,
now
those
these
are a
all,
lot of the trendy teams, man.
Yeah, and I mean, like, if they all have a bump though, like, it doesn't really help anyone, like they're all
can't all
getting
win
it
the
too.
AFC.
In terms of like days, like and I am always I don't put any weight in cumulative really, because to me it's much more how many games are you impacted. Like, we look at the Chargers here. The Chargers,
I was just gonna say,
the Chargers have it worse than the
spot.
Chiefs almost, right? The Chiefs are clustered, and that's obviously noticeable, and that's weird, right? But the Chargers have 4 games where 3 of them where they're in that kind of in that sort of death zone, 3 to 4 days where their opponent gets to practice and prepare for them. One of them where they're facing the Lions coming off their bye.
Well, not only that, but it's something interesting too is if you look a little further at a team that let's stop and pause on the Chargers for a second, because I think, what's your 10-word analysis of the Chargers over the last few years? Is like, Herbert's been good, but the defense has been shaky. And then obviously the coordinator switch is the big story this year. But you look at those rest disadvantage spots, Minnesota, who I guess, yes, we're not that scared of Kirk Cousins, but he's been a kind of a good quarterback, and they have probably one of the better passing games in the NFC. Kansas City has a pretty good offense last time I checked. Detroit, that's kind of what they have going for them, is they're willing to be a kind of a one-sided team. Obviously they spent some money and some resources on that secondary, and they're hoping to be better. But man, the Chargers defense is going to have a hell of a time with these spots like this. Like, that's and obviously Baltimore has a lot to figure out with their wide receiver core. But if Lamar returns to any sort of semblance of where he was in the MVP, that's 4 nasty spots against some good offenses. Yeah,
I like that point.
Chargers give up the most points. Bet.
Yeah, I also would point to, you meant their buy doesn't, their buy is helpful for them, right? Whereas some other teams have their buy canceled, and that's why their cumulative looks so out of whack, right? Mm-hmm. Like Kansas City's cumulative rest is out of whack because they come off of their bye and play Philly, who's also coming off of their bye. So they get no advantage, right? Chargers at least get that Dallas game where they travel and rest advantage over Dallas is pretty nice.
I know my eyes are quickly drawn to the Patriots bye. Finally, they're playing somebody.
For the first time in like 6 years, the Patriots are playing someone who is not coming off of their bye also. So whatever Belichick thought he was getting out of that secret, he doesn't care anymore. The only I guess there are no teams in the AFC in the NFC that face more than one team coming off their bye. But it's just kind of an accumulative effect of a bunch of the kind of medium spots that I think matters. There's an Andorra is interesting there. The Buffalo Bills. You think that tilts the balance between them and the Chiefs in terms of seeding, with the Bills getting that extra week to prepare for KC? Does that mean anything?
Pink is good. I don't
No,
know
pink
why.
is a disadvantage. Pink is you've lost 7 games to your opponent or more.
Okay. I just see pink at the top. I thought I was talking
That's
on
bad.
my ass the whole time I was talking about Chargers. Pink,
No,
pink is
bad.
bad. Pink is bad. Blue is good. All right.
Yeah.
So, Buffalo. A lot of people have sold their stock on Buffalo pretty quick with Dable made the offense go. Diggs doesn't like his quarterback anymore, but there's still so much talent on that roster. And I mentioned you have one spot there where they have the big rest disadvantage with the Denver coming off their bye, but they have a pretty advantageous schedule for a team that's, it's not on the coast technically, but it's an East Coast team. And that's where you see some of these big travel disadvantages where it's like, you can see that they got to go out to Vegas, they got to go out to Denver. There's a few spots like that no, those are home games. Why are they? Oh, those are advantage. Green is good.
Green is good for travel.
I got to get
Orange
used to
is bad for travel.
I got to used to all the colors now. So the Jacksonville game is disadvantage, and then traveling to LA later in the year, disadvantage. So kind of a soft schedule, especially compared to the shit that Kansas City has to put up with. So maybe it does level things off, but at the same time, you still need a lot of the things that went wrong. Like schedule alone won't save you, but if it did, I'd like Buffalo quite a bit.
Yeah. Okay. There are no obvious divisional games. They kind of did a decent job of kind of separating the divisional games away from huge rest advantage disadvantage, which was smart. I think for the most part, the only one we mentioned of LA at KC being a disadvantage for them that's kind of the exception, not the rule. Otherwise, for the most part, there's no clear, oh my gosh, this team is being given the division gift wrapped here. I guess I think of a lot of the younger teams that might want to change quarterbacks. Like Tennessee's bye is interesting to me. Week 7, they come out of bye Atlanta, Pittsburgh, Tampa. That might be time to kick the tires on a Will Levis if you want to make the move. Indy, similarly, middle of the year bye. I doubt we get to week 12 without seeing Anthony Richardson start, but they could elect to wait.
My general feeling is it has to go pretty badly in camp for him not to be just fired up day one.
Okay.
I think I truly do think you get all 3 of them just day one.
Day one. Okay. All right. Bryce Young too. Yeah.
Yeah. I think
all 3 of them. You mean Young, Stroud, Richardson, all 3.
Young, Stroud, Richardson. Yeah.
Okay.
I think Irsay is going to push pretty hard for hey, this is what we're doing. We're going to start him right away. If not, I'm going to go on a bender, guys. So
okay.
And it's not the softest landing spot, but get him in there. And honestly, that's the right move for a lot of these teams. Just start these guys. You're going to expend that kind of draft capital. You better see what you have in a hurry.
Yeah.
Windows don't stay open all that long. I mean, it's the Packers. It wasn't a top 5 pick, but Love's not in the same kind of contract spot as he could have been if they would have moved on a little sooner there.
Birdie makes a note about Pittsburgh at Cincy, back-to-back at Cleveland, at Cincy, back-to-back weeks 11, week 12. Interestingly, those are travel neutral. Those are short trips. This puts into kind of sharp focus the quantifying part of this exercise where, Pittsburgh to Cleveland turns around, Pittsburgh to Cincy. Does that really move the needle for you? I don't think so.
No, those are like half-hour flights.
Yeah.
I mean,
bus ride.
Honestly, you might drive to Cleveland, man.
Yeah. So it's not obvious to me that those are going to be huge disadvantages. And in fact, if you want to talk switch a little bit to travel, because there's not much more to say about rest that I could tell you. The travel stuff, Pittsburgh has it pretty good until the very tail end of the season. their bad spots for travel are against teams that stink, and they're home a ton. Home 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of the first 10 weeks they're at home. Then they have a bye in there, so technically 7. Their road games are at Vegas, at Houston, at Rams. So
yeah, and obviously Vegas
teams.
and Houston aren't predicted to be very good.
Yeah,
The Rams at that point, who knows where they'll be at with that defense? A bit of a fragile spot with the quarterback, and then Cleveland and Cincy are tough because I mean they're better teams. I mean, not only is it divisional rivals, but they're both better than Pittsburgh at this point.
Sure.
And those are going to be tough regardless. I don't think the travel is too bad. Having them back-to-back road isn't fun. I mean, just from playing on the road in front of those fans, having a little bit of a ref bias against you. But then at the end of the year, the Indy game is indoors. Seattle isn't. I guess it's a travel spot, but you're coming off a home game the week before, so you can kind of plan accordingly. And then Baltimore's tough. That's their toughest travel spot, I'd say. Besides, Cincy is the toughest travel spot. That's a very good team.
The team that got thunderstruck the most for travel is the Chargers. Not only do they not have any home field advantage to speak of when they play in SoFi, but their road games this year are sequenced poorly. At Tenny, at Mini, weeks 2, 3. We don't have a ton of signal that says the Chargers are the kind of organization that's going to stay in West Virginia, in between Tennessee and Minnesota, right? So they're probably flying across the country twice there. They're getting some early miles. At KC is not great for them travel-wise, just because KC spends a lot of time at home leading up to that.
LA to Minneapolis is like 4 hours.
Yeah, and then
it's not the easy. Yeah. It's one of those where you trick yourself, like, let's head back home. Like we're not like going back to New York, but it's still a decent flight.
And then things get real weird week 9 on. By the way, at Tenny, at Mini, you're playing early, both of those games, early kickoffs. At the Jets, Detroit, at Green Bay, Baltimore, at New England. So basically you have 2 full cross country flights in 5 weeks and 1 additional, mostly across the country to Green Bay. All 3 of those are expected to be colder weather, much colder weather in those locations than what we would expect in LA.
What's LA to New York? You ever done that, Drew?
It depends on the time of year, but if you had a tailwind, which you usually do going from LA to New York in the fall, early winter, it's like 6 hours, 5.5.
Yeah, I was gonna say Green Bay to LA to Green Bay is 4.5. I mean, it's not that much shorter. It's it's not like it's the middle of the country. It's only like 3. No, that's like Kansas City, man. You're still going quite a bit north to get to Green Bay. So yeah, those are non-trivial travel spots, and in between it, you have some decent teams at home.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I hate to be like I'm out on the Chargers, but don't love the schedule.
No, their schedule looks pretty awful.
I don't love a scheduled team. It's the Chargers so far.
That's a strong agree here. Rest, conflating factors like we were talking about. Bunch of time, bunch of cold. Chargers a team that is equipped to play in the cold, in your opinion?
Herbert played in the Pacific Northwest. Just doesn't get cold like it gets cold here.
Yeah.
And you got to factor the bus ride in from Appleton to Appleton. Like, that's the thing about going to Green Bay too. It's honestly, you know what? Flying to Denver is probably worse. As far as if anyone who's been to Denver International understands, like, oh, we landed in Denver. Just a quick 1.5-hour drive to visit wherever I'm going from this point. Jesus Christ. Who decided where that airport was going to
go? You mentioned Denver. Denver got a pretty advantageous schedule for what I can tell you. Situationally, the league is trying to make Denver happen. They give them 2 home games, week 1 and week 2. Andy, I know you're familiar with Denver in the early part of the season when the old conditioning hasn't entirely kicked in yet. Tough to go play there in weeks 1, week 2. So Vegas drawing
Jimmy G's been doing his conditioning at like Aria, and then he had Sam Howell, and then and then some road games.
Yeah. So Denver is set up to do pretty well out of the gate there. It's a couple of travel spots that are okay. They got to turn around and go to Miami where they'll play in the heat. That'll be interesting. Quick turnaround. That'll be a potential neck breaking reaction market wise if the Broncos take care of business week 1 against the Raiders, catch the Commanders on the elevation week 2, and then go and lay an egg in Miami. That'll be a fun little way to play the Denver Broncos early in the season. A lot of teams come to them at the end of the season. Minnesota comes to them in the winter months. You get a dome team outside. Chargers come to them in the winter months. That's good. And then they don't have the same kind of time zone issues that some of the other AFC West teams have. So Denver, got a pretty favorable little schedule here. I want to point out the teams with the most travel advantage are Indy and Jacksonville, actually. So they're not flying much. Jacksonville actually gets a huge bump from their week 5 game at Buffalo, which is in London. Could not tell you why they did this to the Bills, but that's a big one.
Well, the fact that they no one has ever played a London game and not had to travel that week.
It
is
it's
going
huge.
to really going to test the limits of, because every single, we've talked about this early in the podcast. Like, hey, this team fucked up. Like, they went out way too late. They didn't have enough time to acclimate. We've seen, how many shutouts have we seen in London games? I think it's more modal than you have in just like probably your full sample of NFL games. Sometimes teams absolutely go over there and just fucking no show. But no one's ever had to put up with this, where the team has been over there, played a game the week before already. So that huge. It's crazy that they have this much travel advantage despite having an international game.
Yeah. They get to do nothing and the Bills have to travel 6,000 kilometers. Like that's as good as it gets.
I suppose it's always been neutral.
Yeah.
Your international game is just a throwaway. It's
usually a throwaway. Yeah.
But depending on how far the other team came, the West
right.
Coast team traveling obviously would have a little more than Jacksonville, but not only is the team super used to being there, playing 2 games over there is super unique. I'm excited to see how this hashes out.
Yeah, also excited to see what happens to Jags after spending 2 weeks in London when they come home. They come home and play Indy at home, but they have a disadvantage travel-wise because they're traveling farther to get to Indianapolis. To get to Jacksonville than Indy is. Then New Orleans pit back-to-back roads before their bye. They're gonna have to do some serious sports science to get their guys acclimatized to the time change and then back on stateside time because they're gonna have to play all 3 of those games before they get a reset with the bye. So decent chance to sell some Indy stock if you want to after they beat Buffalo in London. That would be nice. The Colts barely traveling this year.
They have a nice centralized location.
Yeah, it's a good one. There's virtually no games where they have more than a slight disadvantage travel-wise, even though they got it back-to-back travel a couple times this season.
Yeah.
I will note that Pittsburgh finishing road is interesting. Pittsburgh's schedule is backloaded road in general.
Not just road, but road, West Coast road, and then Baltimore's not that far, but it's road. Yeah,
and that's potentially that game. It's going to factor into the AFC North one way.
I really do think Pittsburgh is in the mix late for a wild card. I don't have them winning the division very often. I know you're a little higher on them than I am, but I have them clearly in that like 6 to 10 range where it's kind of a mess. There's going to be, we're going to sit there in week 17, week 16 and say like, hey, these 11 teams can all end up as a 7th seed still. And that sucks for them to have that Seattle-Baltimore spot, because that's essentially, if you make it through that, like, hey, it's your reward now. Go play another road game because you're a wild card team. Like, guess what? You're going to Buffalo. Guess what? You're going to, wherever. You're going to, God, who's another division winner? Not Kansas City. They have too tough a schedule. Giving that one to the Broncos right now. You're heading to Denver. Just calling my shots. Sean Payton, Stan right here. But yeah, it's tricky when you end up with those weird things like, hey, if you want to make it deep in the playoffs, you're gonna have to win like 5 straight road games, and that shit just doesn't happen.
And I mean that's a good reason to focus on Steelers. If you agree with me that the Steelers are going to surprise to the good, I think you focus on regular season. I don't think you can pretty much count on Kenny Pickett to stink in the wild card round if they can even get there. So that's at least where my head is at. Let's see here.
Anything else before we flip over to the NFC?
I have. I guess I just wanted to point
the Jets as well. The Jets end up with the double road game, and as high as we are in the Jets, I think a lot of people probably consider Buffalo the class yet, and there's 2 other really good teams, so you can have another spot where it's like, hey, the Jets made the playoffs, and we'll play their 3rd straight road game again, 4th and 5 weeks.
Incredible. Miami's schedule overall travel-wise is pretty positive. Wanted to point that out. Chargers is bad. Cleveland's is not great for where Cleveland is.
Well, Miami's is good, especially late. A lot the 2 biggest disadvantages for Miami are right off the bat.
Right out of the gate.
Get it out of the way.
Yeah.
Hopefully New England hasn't figured out the offense
yet. I will also say that I take very, very light weight of any kind of travel disadvantage week 1, right? You've got so much time to get ready for that. There's no cumulative fatigue of the buildup of the season impacting you at that point. So week 1, I don't think you really do have that much of a disadvantage. Week 2 at New England.
We talked about that a little. Like some of these teams where it's like, hey, you're on the road, but like you knew you were on the road 6 months ago and you planned week 3 of the preseason around this, and you've been planning for this game for a while. You've planned your travel prep. Nobody's coming off a game. Essentially, a lot of the backups who just don't even make the team anyway. So yeah, that week 1 road game really isn't nearly as punitive as anything else down the stretch.
Yep, Chargers, another negative. 6 of their 17 games are dealing with time or cold. Las Vegas as well. Las Vegas always playing these early games. 5 of them this year. 1 cold weather game. It's at KC, so not they dodged the cold bullet, but they got the time bullet. Miami's got a bunch of coldies.
We call them coldies.
Coldies, yeah, cold ones. They got 1, 2, 3, 4. Arguable whether it's going to be that cold in Philly, I guess, week 7, but that meets the criteria of off by 25 degrees. The Miami Dolphins and Kansas City Chiefs play in Frankfurt. They elected to take their bye after the trip to Frankfurt.
I like that too.
The Patriots, who's the other team? The Patriots and the Colts also play in Frankfurt. They also elected to take their byes after they play in Frankfurt. So the 2 Germany games are immediately followed by bye weeks for both teams. The 3 London games are all play on, except Tennessee. Tennessee elected to take their break after they played Baltimore in London week 6. They're going to take a break after that. So interesting decision making by a couple of these teams, obviously. And I mean, I don't see an obvious spot for the Patriots to stay across the coast this year like they have in years past. I don't see an obvious spot for any other teams to really lean into that. The Chargers are the only exception and that's the beginning of the season for them. Their other bad travel spots are spread out so that they can't even do anything about it. So that's a rough one. Chargers.
Yeah, really the most obvious sleepover spot is Jacksonville. We will 100% guarantee they will stay in the Greenwich Mean Time Zone.
Instead of
Bring that
flying
to a
6,000
stretch.
kilometers home.
Yes,
Yeah.
Can you fucking imagine? Oh my God, that would kill me. Obviously, you brought up the Jets. Oh no, I thought they had two. It was just that's actually home versus the Chargers. Yeah, there's not as many of those spots. Is there some?
No.
Let's flip over to the NFC. Is there some?
There's a bunch in the
sleepover
NFC.
spots?
Yeah, there's a bunch. Yeah, let's go in NFC next.
Next,
Your
third.
What should we do next? The NFC? Yeah, let's do that.
Yes, let's do it.
Okay. The first thing that stands out is pretty obviously in smack in the middle of this chart.
The Rams.
The Rams are playing 4 teams coming off a bye. We said
Yeah,
it in the AFC. There's no team in the AFC that plays more than 1.
Well,
and the Rams do it 4.
So 4 times is a lot. 4 times is the most I've ever seen. But twice in a row, 2 weeks in a row.
2 weeks in a row, right?
2 weeks in a row, twice. Not spread out throughout the season. Like, no, you get Pittsburgh and Dallas off their bye before heading to Lambeau. And then you get Baltimore and Washington, later in the season after a game with Cleveland. Like, and 2 of them are road games.
Yeah,
they really
trash
here. Really got some that the Rams and the Niners obviously stuck out for me right away.
The Niners are interesting too because not only do they have the
3 buys,
the 3 off of buys, they have the 2 additional. They have the mini buy. Seattle's got a mini buy before them, and Washington's got a small advantage. So San Francisco actually loses the most rest relative to their opponents, even more than the Rams. They have a net rest loss of -20. Rams
one of the worst games. The worst game is clearly Buffalo having to go and play Jacksonville the second week, but in London. But this is just everything, especially if Dallas turns out to be a battle. And you've had 3 straight home games, which is one thing, but at that point, you're playing an early game for a West Coast team, not all the way across the country, but pert near, and they're coming off their bye. And that's a really nasty spot, especially if Cleveland has shit figured out by week 5, because what we saw at the end of the last year wasn't super scary, I guess, at this point. But Cleveland, Minnesota, Cincy heading into the bye. I don't know. I guess we'll probably be buying the Niners in the second half of the season. That's a shit stretch, and that might be a sleepover spot too. That Cleveland Minnesota thing. It's not like the East Coast, but man, don't you just hey, let's go to Canton and check out the hall?
They have connections to Youngstown.
Yep.
Where they stayed over between Tampa to Cincy a couple years ago. They stayed over in Youngstown. So they'll probably stay for Cleveland, Minnesota, I would guess. But there's still some bad spots on their schedule. They got to make a trip to Philly later in the season. They got to make a trip to Jacksonville. They got to make a trip to Washington. These Niners are traveling a ton, and they are not given a lot of rest advantages. They have to deal with 4 games where they have a meaningful rest disadvantage. I will also point out Atlanta has to play 3 games where they have a meaningful rest disadvantage. They got to play 2 mini bye teams in the Jets and the Commanders, and then they get Tennessee off of their bye. So Atlanta was rest losers. Tampa Bay is a rest loser. They got 4 games where they're at a rest disadvantage, 3 mini buys, and 1 Indy off the bye. So the rest tilted significantly against the NFC for some reason this year. Travel also, because if I remember correctly, the NFC has 1 fewer home game this year, I think.
Yeah, it is AFC's year to have the extra game.
Yeah, there's 9 road games for every NFC team. NFC getting dealt a little bit of a blow here. San Francisco, interesting to me because shoot, man.
He misspelled it, so I had to put it on the screen. The Linos, 12 of 17 games are indoors.
Yeah, boy, they lucked out big time. Usually they're suffering from a handful of cold weather end of season. but they only have one this year, and it is at Chicago. Chicago coming off their bye, getting the Lions outdoors week 14 to try to salvage any hope of a division, I would guess. The Niners look to me like they're going to have a little bit of a tough time, a little bit of a tough go of it. They got some easy wins on the schedule with the Rams and the Cardinals in the first 4 weeks. But I could see them getting to their bye and being a 500-ish team, at which point I completely agree with you. That's like a team that is just going to be a blazing, flashing bye signal until the end of the year. I like that they get a mini bye in preparation for Philly. That's going to be a huge game, week 13. I think just in general, Philly got an interesting schedule where they are at rest disadvantage against teams like San Francisco and Dallas and Buffalo to a lesser degree. Philly's stretch from week 9, including the bye, until week 16 is amazingly tough. You host Dallas, you get your break at KC, Buffalo, San Fran, at Dallas. That 4-game stretch right there is the toughest strength of opponent of any team in 4 games all season. And that stands alone as the toughest stretch for any team by a lot. Like that's as tough as it gets. It's coming off their bye.
And it gets easier, and we certainly don't want to put these teams in the same classes like Kansas City, but man, like Seattle and New York were playoff teams last year. And, some people are calling for a little downtick from New York, but essentially at the end, you have 3 out of your last 4 games are playoff teams from last year as well. Like that's nasty for the second half of the season, I guess.
Mm-hmm. First place schedule, no question about it. This is the kind of schedule that it's the kind of sequencing that you cook up if you're trying to make sure that a team has a Super Bowl hangover. If I had to kind of speculate a little,
has a team that lost the Super Bowl ever had that?
I don't know. I just coined that phrase for the first time on this podcast.
To coin a phrase.
The big story in the NFC is rest. Is there a team that had a decent amount of cumulative rest advantage? The answer is Chicago. Actually,
I was going to say not only rest, but it's not huge travel advantage, but similar to Indy, it's like, hey, you're kind of centralized. You can't have, unless you had the international trip, which nobody in the NFC does besides the Atlanta game. Not a lot of airplanes on this one. Most of the international games are it's only Atlanta, right? It's the only participant in the international series from the NFC. So just that, even though they have the extra road game, like just being centrally located, Minnesota not being very far, Detroit not being very far, like the fact that the division is so tightly packed as well for those 3 road games. And then some of your other road games just aren't that far. Like it's not even that bad going down to New Orleans. Washington's not that bad. Like Cleveland's obviously very close. Like they don't have a lot of nasty travel spots at all. And then some decent rest advantages as well.
Yeah.
So maybe
both games against Detroit, interestingly, and a game against Minnesota. So 3 of your 6 divisional games for the Bears are positive rest. It's pretty big. It's pretty big. All 3 of those also you have a small travel advantage. So Bears, their league's trying to make the Bears happen. We'll see if that's a thing.
And Minnesota too. Minnesota's schedule isn't too bad as far as advantages and disadvantages. The biggest one being that travel spot to Vegas.
Yeah.
But it's off a bye. That's a double dip of travel. Cincinnati's not that far from Minneapolis, but at least your worst travel disadvantage spot is, supposedly a shitty team in the Vegas Raiders at that point.
Yep. Worth noting, the Washington Commanders are getting a lot of extra rest compared to their opponents as well. This is death by a small cut on 3 of these 5 games. They have an advantage, but 2 of them, they got the mini bye and a bye. That's obviously noteworthy. Green Bay has small rest advantages in 4 games in their first 8 weeks, which is kind of weird. Like they're really, really given a soft start, or at least a head start maybe against their opponents for the first half of the season. As expected, Arizona's travel sucks.
I mean, they have they have an advantage every time they're home, because look at all the teams that are traveling to Atlanta. I mean, it's outside of the teams in their division that are just up the coast. Man, it's all like the Giants, Cincy, Baltimore, Atlanta. Those are all decent spots as far as getting there. So they have some, the travel advantage as far as those teams having to come to a place where they've traditionally not played well over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
Because it's such a strong home field advantage they have. But some bad spots as well. Obviously, later in the season, team going to Pittsburgh, going to Chicago, going to Philly. That's gross.
Yeah, I mean, if I told you in the blind that the Cardinals finish 0-9 on the road, would it surprise you in the least?
No, that's definitely in the cards. In the cards.
Every one of their road games except at LA is a bad one. So there's 8 losses already on the Cardinals schedule, which is not great for a team that has no talent. The NFC South is nothing noteworthy at all from what I could tell you, other than Atlanta's going outside week 13, week 15, week 17. But I will contend that there is no Atlanta Falcons team in my lifetime that I can remember being more prepared for outdoor football in the months of November, December. This is a blue collar ish type of team, the way they're built. So they should be okay in those spots. I can't get over Dallas is going out into the cold 4 times. They may be fine by that too, just because they're now such a balanced team, offense, defense. But interesting kind of a confluence of negative when Dallas plays at Carolina. Confluence of negative when Dallas goes at the Chargers. That looks like a scheduled loss to me. Dallas sleepover, you think, with San Francisco and Chargers back to back to negate some of that? Because otherwise that's a disaster of a spot.
Yeah, so it's not that far, but I think some of these these sleepover spots, you got to start throwing out the distance a little more and being just the fact that you lose an entire day between packing up and going to the airport and fucking around and getting to town and heading home. Like there's a definite case to be made for let's stay, let's practice at like Stanford's facility or something, and head down to LA in a day or something. I don't know. Like I would do that almost anytime I had back-to-backs that were, in the same, within a stone's throw.
Yeah.
Two Cali games, even for a centralized, Southern, but centralized team, I would stay over for that.
Okay. Well, keep an eye on, circle that one for travel notes, as Dallas prepares for that Chargers game that looks like a scheduled loss.
Yeah, we'll get it right after the bye.
The NFC North, again, kind of leaning into the idea that's going to be a division full of high totals. Not a lot of rest problems, not a lot of travel problems for a lot of all those teams are going to be in prime condition, set up to do well. And Detroit, the most interesting of them all, the Linos, as Sam mentioned. They are indoors perpetually, particularly through the poor part of the season where you want to be indoors. Really just kind of an extremely fortunate run for them, where by the looks of it, Vegas they are only outdoors once at Chicago.
You know what? And I had to look at this because I was pretty sure that they're falling on these 2 days. But the Cardinals play in Chicago on Christmas Eve. and then they gotta go home for Christmas, and then head back to Philly, and that's New Year's
For New
Eve.
Year's Eve, yeah.
Like, hey, like the league, when the league is mad at you, I guess they're mad at you. It's like, guess what? You're not spending holidays at home. It's fine. You know, the Lions obviously are used to working on at least one holiday. So I guess they said we'll screw them too with some travel spots as well. What do they have? Yeah, they have Minnesota, Dallas. Not like super long down to Minnesota, but New Year's Eve in Minnesota, and then Dallas for New Year's Eve, or Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve. Those are what those 2 Sundays will be. So interesting, fucked up holidays for the poor Cardinals.
And yeah, it's not, they're going to be sitting at like a 2-12 record too, so it's not going to feel good on those buses on those flights.
Yeah, it's like, man, I'm just hoping I get traded this
I'm
offseason.
cracking up about the
nothing like whacker drive on Christmas Eve, guys. It's
yeah.
Honestly, I like Chicago. I shouldn't talk shit.
I'm cracking up about the Lions thing too, Sam. And the best part of that is this isn't even the first Lions typo that's made news. You remember, of course, our
the
friend
loins.
Ben Solak having, yeah, I can't remember the context.
Pre-Twitter Blue, when you had no edit button. Oh my God, what a case for the edit button. He had just a banger tweet and he spelled it loins.
Loins.
At that point, once it starts popping in the notifications, you get a shitload. You can't delete it anymore. You gotta just leave it. Oh, I know that drove him nuts too.
Yeah. Yep. All right. Well, it seems like if I had to take kind of a macro takeaway here, the NFL is using travel and rest against the Niners to keep them grounded. They're using sequencing against the Eagles to keep them, they challenge them.
What would you say was the worst schedule in the AFC?
Chargers.
Kansas City or Chargers?
Chargers, I think.
Okay.
Because the Chargers have to play Kansas City twice, so by definition, they have to have a worse schedule than the Chiefs.
You have to play the Chiefs twice, and the Chiefs never play the Chiefs.
Exactly.
They're keeping all the good coaches down. Like Staley should be flattered because they've stuck a lot of the good coaches: McVay, Shanahan, Reed, and Brent Staley.
Yep.
Tough schedules. And Jonathan Gannon. Oh man, like,
boy.
I know, like, we do a lot of this where we don't know these people and we can be awful hard on them. Sometimes it's just because they have a funny name, or we like, hey, where did this guy come from? Someone pointed out who was it? Anarumo. We're like, who is this guy? And now you're like a big Anarumo stan. Of course. Yeah. It's funny how like we turn on.
Yeah. Who Anarumo?
Every year we do this with some coordinators. For for sure. I believe, and we've cooled on him quite a bit because of the head coaching has not gone like the coordinating did, but we did this with Art Smith a few years back when he first got promoted to coordinator down there.
That was because he was Arthur FedEx Smith. Money. Yeah. We couldn't pick him out of a lineup. Yeah.
My dad was in Castaway. Like, that's how I got this job. So, and obviously we fell in love with him a little too, but we do that every year. Yeah. So maybe Jonathan Gannon's actually good. We don't know.
Yeah, and I mean, I've already started aggressively turning tail on Matt Canada. Yeah, he was a easy punching bag all year last year, and he got better towards the end of the season based on all the data I'm seeing. So if he continues to emerge, that'll help my case on Pittsburgh. And if Pittsburgh struggles, I can blame it on him, and we can have a Viking funeral for Matt Canada. All right.
We won't actually burn it.
We won't actually burn it. We will revisit a lot of this stuff, particularly on a team by team basis as we go through our team previews. But
start next week. You guys.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be driving to South Dakota and back this weekend. And by driving, I mean my wife likes to drive. I'm not like, you're driving. I have work, but like she enjoys driving because she can't sleep in the car anyway. But yeah, I'm gonna be just prepping because we have first team previews. What division did we decide? I don't know. We set it off the air and I can't remember.
AFC West.
Oh yeah, just everything's pretty static outside of the quarterback situation that doesn't matter anyway.
Mm-hmm. We're going to actually redo the Raiders. We're not going to use that clip as a joke on the Raiders.
Oh, yeah. What was our Raiders clip? That was this. Just, it doesn't matter.
I mean, it was basically that they built the team to fail. You know?
Yeah, like guess what? You have a lame duck coach who probably doesn't get fired for 3 years. Like that's where they're at. Like he's in year 1 of a 3-year lame duckacy, and maybe year 2 of a 4-year lame duckacy at this point. If it keeps going the way it trended last year, they have a star wide receiver and a mess at quarterback, and Lord knows how the rest of this is going to go. So very interesting. But the other 3 teams, a lot of interesting things to talk about. If the Kansas City Chiefs can continue to do it different ways, although it shouldn't be too much different from last year, other than guys starting to age a little.
Yeah,
huge
questions.
Denver has a Hall of Fame quarterback and a Hall of Fame coach, and they are very big question mark. And then obviously Kansas City trying to do it with. We'll get to find out if they actually made an improvement in their offensive play calling or not.
It's going to be very cool.
That's going to be huge. So we'll check you next week. And yeah, check us out on Threads. It is at Deep Dive. Not yet. I haven't
What
account
is
there.
I don't even know what's going on.
Threads
this is the actual Twitter replacement. Is that what I'm gleaning?
So no. It's Facebook's version of Twitter. The early returns are in. So far, it's awful. Like, you can't view posts chronologically. It chooses how you view them. You can't really search things. But if they say the main positive was, like, why would somebody with like 50,000 followers go onto Mastodon or Blue Sky and be like, yeah, I'd love to start all over. Be like, hey, I need to build up this big following again. Otherwise, I'm shouting into the void. Obviously, that's stupid and worthless. And that's why. And then Blue Sky, you can't even join without an invite. But with Threads, some of these people with bigger Instagram followings, I think you can just bring it over or like alert your whole like if you're following someone on Instagram, like it links the same way that Facebook and Instagram would link because it's a meta product. So I think some of these bigger Instagram influencers might move over there to do text posting rather than pictures, because those when you're big on Instagram for your bikini modeling, that's how you're going to continue to grow.
That's what I want to hear commentary only. About current events from for
text
sure.
Only is not going to be your greatest medium, but there's going to be some interesting. This one might have a chip chair and a chance, because every other new social platform has just sucked.
Okay. All right. Well,
we'll find out. I guess that's it. We'll see you.
I really don't want to start over on other
platform. Well, I had to go check it out.
I think when Twitter dies, I'm just going to be like, oh, thank God.
I'm free.
Yeah, I'm free. Yeah, it's put me out of my misery.
I still barely understand it.